All right, so we are looking at chapter 9 today in your regular NASM. We're looking at sort of the fitness assessment approach to things, right? And so as we're looking at this, we're going through slides like 7 to 43, which is kind of funny. Like I said, we're actually going to kind of stay in this one PowerPoint this whole time, but we're going to look at the differences between our different informations and what it really means to do an assessment and stuff. So we kind of it was almost like yesterday or the day before when we were looking at our 3 major postural distortions. It's kind of like a sneak peek. We'll get back into talking about the muscles and stuff, but there are other parts of assessments that if we're going to cover them, we have to do it in the beginning. So looking at our types of information that we've got, we're going to kind of break fitness assessments down. Let's see here, slide 7, where are we at? We're going to break fitness assessments down, into 2 major categories of information. You are going to have your subjective information, and you are going to have your objective information. And so, we have a variety of different techniques. We're looking at a variety of different things. Your subjective information is any of the information about your client that you cannot measure, right? It's the unmeasurable information. So it's still important. It is still absolutely like a vital part of the conversation with your client, and it will inform your exercise selection decisions. But subjective information is, because it is immeasurable, is a little bit difficult to track progress sometimes. Like if you ask your client how they're feeling, right, they're going to give you a subjective answer, right? Unless you were to ask them, to how they're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, and then all of a sudden it becomes pretty measurable. But for the most part, this is very immeasurable information. So this is going to give us, it gives us an opportunity to kind of get feedback regarding our clients' personal history, their occupation, their lifestyle, their medical background. All of those things are very much pieces of subjective information. And so they are really helpful though, knowing about what a client's occupation is going to tell you a little bit about what their energy expenditure looks like over the course of a day. Or if you ask them what their family history is, right? That's going to, or their personal history, like if they have experience doing, X, Y, or Z, have they ever worked out before, do they see themselves as physically active, what their favorite hobbies are. If those hobbies are really active things, it's like, okay, well, how often do you engage in those, and they're like, well, a couple times, a week, here and there. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to burn a substantial amount of energy. And so that kind of relays to us a little bit of information about what this person's life is like. And then that's going to help us make informed decisions about how we write our program for them. So subjective information, sometimes I feel like, and I was definitely like this, I feel like sometimes there's not as much emphasis placed on subjective information because it's not measurable. So sometimes tracking progress just feels a little bit funky. You're trying to say you're trying to see consistent progress towards something. It's really easy to see if you're losing weight, which is a very objective thing, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, it was 200 pounds, now I'm 199 pounds, now I'm 198, 97. You can see it going down because it's number based, right? Whereas subjective information isn't quite as measurable. So sometimes I feel like a lot of personal trainers don't put enough emphasis on it because they're like, I want the trackable, measurable stuff. But the subjective information is really, really handy because it really does kind of inform you about it. It's sort of like if objective information is the what about your client's current status, your subjective information is the why about how they got there, right? So looking at our objective information, we've got a couple different categories of that as well. That's going to be things like your physiologic assessments, your body composition assessments, cardiorespiratory assessments, postural assessments, and performance assessments. You know, these are all things that have numbers attached to them. Physiologic assessments are things like heart rate. Body composition are assessments like, you know, body fat percentage or scale weight. Cardiorespiratory assessments are, you know, how well the heart performs under a specific amount of stress. Static and dynamic postural assessments like the overhead squat or the pushing and the pulling assessment are going to tell us a little bit about like how much angle, you know, someone has in their pelvis or something. And then performance assessments are, you know, what's your 1 rep max, or how high can you jump, or, you know, how fast can you go through this sort of obstacle, you know? So that's all very measurable stuff. If you speed up how fast you can go through an obstacle, well, you know, we're looking for improvement. So don't just think of your assessments as like a way to gather information, although that is what they are, you know, 100% for. Like the main purpose of your fitness assessment is to like gather information about your client to allow you to make a very effective program for that client. But at the same time, it's also a really fun way to track progress. It's a good way to get your client like excited about like the progress that they might be making, saying like, hey, like we're seeing improvements here, here, and here. The first time you ever did this, we were like this, but now you're like this, right? We can actually see that improvement there. So looking at subjective information, like I said, this is your personal history, your lifestyle, your medical background, and it's some of the easiest pieces of information that you can gather because really it's just you going through a questionnaire. So just like we did yesterday, where we sort of like paired up and went through these questionnaires, right? The first thing that you always want to start with, guys, is going to be your PAR-Q. That's your physical activity readiness questionnaire. So these are questions that are directed towards detecting any possible cardiorespiratory dysfunction. So most of the questions on there are all cardiorespiratory based. There is one that it does say also like if you have any bone or joint issue that could be made worse by exercise. And basically, we're just looking to see like if it is even safe for us to continue with this like assessment process. They've actually updated the PAR-Q. PAR-Q. It got a little bit more complicated in a. Oop, that's actually that's the same one. In a very positive way, actually. Oh, that's also the same one. What the heck, NASM? You got to take your old links down. So they actually updated the PAR-Q, and you'll notice the 7 questions are exactly the same, right there. It's like, do you have a medication? Do you have a bone or joint problem that may be worse by exercise? But what's kind of cool is now it has like instructions, you know, down at the bottom, and like their name and signature and things like that. Now it does say like if you answered yes to one or more of the questions above on these pages, we're going to kind of continue down onto these versions down here, which are some sort of follow-up questions. And these are going to be like specific questions about what conditions they might actually be struggling with. And so now you're going to see like, do you have arthritis, osteoporosis, low back problems, any different types of cancers, cardiovascular conditions, right? And so it's sort of a flow chart now where it's like, if no, go to question 4, but if yes, it's like, all right, do you have chronic heart failure? Are you diagnosed with coronary artery disease? All right, we kind of like get more specific about each of those like 7 things that we asked about. Do you have a spinal cord injury? Have you ever had a stroke? Do you have any medical conditions not listed above? Like, you know, list it right here. And then you kind of work your way down and you say like, all right, well, you know, if you actually do have permission from your doctor, you're going to sign this participation declaration, which is basically going to say, hey, I understand that exercise is an elevated amount of stress on my body, and I am agreeing to you know, participate in this exercise program. So you're covered in the old version of the PAR-Q as well already. You know, by making sure that like you are asking your client, you're covered under like a verbal agreement, because you can say like, hey, all right, you said yes to this. Do you have a doctor's permission to exercise? And if your client says yes, then that's a verbal agreement that like it's safe to continue working with this person. But this new version is a freaking written agreement. You know, it's hard in stone. It goes in their file. You're not going to lose it. You know, so it's a little bit of a better version. They've kind of upgraded it over the years. But basically, the big thing to remember, guys, and this is how they like to word this, if you ever end up seeing it on like your homework or test questions or whatever, if a client answers yes to any of the questions on the PAR-Q, make sure they get medical clearance from a doctor before they engage in an exercise program. And that's really the purpose of the PAR-Q. We're trying to, figure out if it's even appropriate for us to start working with this client. So once you get through there, once you get through the PAR-Q, you're going to move into a general/medical history questionnaire. And so we do want to gather a little bit of information about their medical history, because that's going to help us if they do have any like aches or pains or injuries or anything like that. Our medical history is going to sort of alert us to that. It's also going to be questions about their general history as well. What does their occupation look like, right? Do they have extended periods of sitting or repetitive movements or things like that? And so when we ask questions like that, does your occupation require extended periods of sitting? We know that that can lead to overactive like hip flexor muscles, right? Sitting puts you into a hip flexed position. Extended periods of sitting also means low energy expenditure. It means that like you're not going to be burning very many calories. So both of those things, right, are definitely going to be, an it could explain why our client hasn't reached their goals, right? A lot of times people will come to you. I'd say like, I don't know. I'd say like 40%. No, probably way higher than that, actually. I'd probably say like 60% of all clients who are coming to you are people who have actually tried to lose weight in the past, and like not succeeded. Like they're like looking to a personal trainer for the answers to like why they didn't succeed in their problems. And so sometimes this subjective information can sort of paint in the background to help you understand like really what happened, on their sort of like fitness journey, right? So if you say, like, if you ask your client if they have, extended periods of repetitive movements, like in their lifestyle, and they also complain that they have like regular shoulder pain, that could absolutely be related to, these repetitive movements they're making. Maybe it's a lot of overhead stuff. Maybe it's a lot of like twisting, whatever it happens to be. Does your occupation require you to wear shoes with an elevated heel? That's actually an important question, because we know that elevated heels put you into plantar flexion. You're basically pointing your toe away all freaking day. And so your calf muscle is in a shortened position and your anterior tibialis is in a lengthened position. And so now you have spent all day, messing up your length tension relationships. And so now suddenly your client's really good at plantar flexion and they really struggle with dorsiflexion. I used to date this girl who had just the most overactive calf muscles I've ever seen. She would sleep and like both of her feet would just point. It was like a straight freaking line. She looked like she was doing ballet in her sleep. And she would complain about like back pain all the time. And I told her, I was like, we need to strengthen your feet. Like, this seems kind of crazy, but like you really need to like loosen up your calves and get this back to a neutral position. Like I guarantee you that's gonna, that's sort of what's causing most of your problems. And eventually she kind of took my advice and it started having like a really positive effect. We just slowly stretched out our calves every single day. So elevated heels are definitely like a really big one. And then does your occupation require cause you a lot of mental stress or mental anxiety? We know that stress often leads to those shallow breathing patterns. Those shallow breathing patterns use the secondary respiratory muscles that we talked about, right? Your pectoralis, your trapezius muscles, your sternocleidomastoid. It uses all those muscles that help you breathe under like, stressful or physically demanding situations. But those are also posture muscles. Unfortunately, those also play a role in like your shoulder posture and things like that. And so when you tighten those muscles up, and the other thing, I mean, look at your upper trapezius here. Let's see if I can find your upper traps. Oh, that's kind of funny. You can actually see here. This is sort of a trigger point chart. If you have pain in any of these areas, well, loosening up your upper trapezius actually can have a pretty positive effect on all of this area here. But the reason for that Trying to find like all the posterior fascia of the head, but they're all cut off at the neck because that's what I looked up. Oh, there we go. So you can kind of see actually like this sort of white section here. That's all the fascia, right? Like these muscles are directly attached to all of this fascia. And so it literally pulls the muscles in your skull down, and then those get really tight, and that can cause, tension headaches. So when your client has like pain in the back of the head, like that's the type of headache that they tend to get, it is often from upper trapezius muscles being too tight. And those were there to help you breathe, but unfortunately, they are also posture muscles. And so that, we want to ask questions like that because that can definitely, again, like I said, paint in the pictures. Then we're gonna also ask questions about their lifestyle and their hobbies. These are questions that are going to provide information about your client's sort of general interests, right? General interest, which is really good because like you're going to figure out like what your client thinks is fun. We love asking questions about that because like I love to it's a great way for you to build rapport. If your client says that like they like to play like pickleball, I personally have only done that like one time, but my roommate is obsessed. So it's a fun little conversation that the two of us can have, right? Like I can bring it up and say, oh yeah, my roommate plays pickleball. He absolutely loves it. I went with him one time. And you can start to build rapport with your client. You can start to build that relationship with them, and sort of endear yourself to this person. So lifestyle history questionnaires also very, very helpful. They provide you, a little bit of information about what your client thinks is fun, or, how you can write an interactive program for them. Now, obviously, we've also got our medical history questionnaire. These are going to be questions about your client's like medical history, any past surgeries or injuries that they may have had. That's going to tell you what to focus on in terms of like what needs mobility or what needs stabilization. Like if your client had, let's say, ACL reconstructive surgery, right? Well, that means that they're probably going to have some type of scar tissue in the knee. So they're going to need a lot of like mobility drills for their knee joint, as well as focusing on like developing stability, because there's no way that they tore their ACL if they had good posture. So we got to look towards like the stabilizing thing in order to figure out like what exercises to give them and help them like get to a neutral position. It could also be chronic health conditions. That's going to give us a little bit of information about where we should sort of, direct our focus when it comes to writing a program. If they have, let's say diabetes, we focus on high intensity exercise so we can burn through their glycogen stores. If they have coronary artery disease, we focus on low intensity exercise because we don't want to push their heart too hard. And we're trying to go for duration here. We're trying to go for endurance. So, everybody's going to be a little bit different. And then we definitely want to ask questions about like what medications they might be on. By understanding like what medications they are on, we can understand like how those things are affecting your heart rate. So if we look here, this is a chart that's in your assessments chapter. Let's see here. So this little chart right here, and there's two of them. There's this one and there's this one. So this will show you like what these medications are often prescribed for. If they say they're on a nitrate, it's because they typically have hypertension and congestive heart failure. If they're on like a vasodilator, that's usually used for hypertension, but also congestive heart failure. If they're on beta blocker, that is also for hypertension, but it's also for arrhythmias. So if they have like an irregular heart rhythm. So these are some questions that you can ask, and then you can figure out like, well, what happens to their heart rate and blood pressure? If you've got a medication that lowers their blood pressure, you got to be cautious because that person may have a hard time getting blood back up to their head. So if you bring them into a position where they're laying face down, or if they're laying face up, they're horizontal, and then all of a sudden they go to a position where they're vertical, their blood may all of a sudden drop, back to where it was because they just went, blood wants to be back over there. So they're going to experience this sort of dramatic drop in blood pressure, and it can feel really bad, and they might pass out. So we got to be cautious if they're on a medication that is lowering their blood pressure. you're gonna want to be careful about like the types of exercises that you choose, because you don't want to, change the relationship of your client's head too quickly. Or maybe they're on a heart rate medication that's going to artificially lower their heart rate. Well, if that's the case, then when you're getting your client on the treadmill, you don't want to run into some scenario where you're like, you're killing it, your heart rate's not even going up, and then you're just hitting the plus sign like a bunch, and they're sprinting as hard as they can trying to keep up, but their heart rate is like artificially lowered. That's not great, right? Like, suddenly, they're going to have heart problems, or they're going to tear a hamstring muscle, or something's going to go wrong. So we want to ask about medications. Those are definitely some handy pieces of information. So all of that's your subjective stuff. And I know that, by the way, like, sometimes like medication feels like it should be objective, because you're taking 10 milligrams, it's like, it's got a number on it, right? But the way it affects everybody is going to be different. 10 milligrams is going to affect you different than it's going to affect me, different than it's going to affect, Bob and Sally. So that's why that's still considered subjective. It's sort of immeasurable. So that is our subjective information. Now that's all the stuff that you want to get out of the way, like right at the top of your session. And like we did yesterday, when we met up, we started with all that subjective stuff. And we did it in like a seated position, so this is the stuff where you're kind of working at the desk, and you figure out like what your client sort of does, and what their interests are and stuff. And then we're going to move into our objective information. We are going to move into the number-based stuff. This is where we get into our physiologic assessments, right? So the first objective information that category you've got, like I said, is going to be the physiologic stuff. And so we are going to gather our client's heart rate, okay? And so what we want to figure out is what their resting heart rate is. Now, your true resting heart rate should be taken like in the morning as you are getting out of bed. But like, good luck getting your clients to remember to freaking do it. I've had trouble with that forever. I'll be like, I will text you like as you are getting up. What time do you wake up? But nobody ever does it. So instead, you would have your client sit for 5 minutes. That's going to bring their heart rate down, and then you are going to test for their resting heart rate. Lucky for you, you have been interviewing your client this entire time, and they have been sitting down for about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. So it's a really great time for you to gather their resting heart rate. That should be the first thing that you do before your client stands up. And so what you're going to do is, like I said, we want to figure out what their heart rate is. NASM is going to recommend using the radial pulse, not the carotid. NASM doesn't like the carotid because, it's a little bit more personal. You're placing your hand on their neck. And number two, you could technically close off their windpipe if you press really hard, although I don't know why you would be pressing that hard anyways. I have no problem with the radial pulse personally. I don't think it's that awkward, but generally we're going to recommend using the radial pulse. And the way that's going to work is you're basically going to use two fingers lightly placed along the arm in line just above the wrist with the thumb and the index finger. So we're basically just going to go right above those two fingers there. And we're just going to press until we feel it. And there it is, right? Now, this pulse right here is a very easy way, it's a very easy way to kind of gather what their heart rate is. You always want to do it on the left arm because that's closest to the heart. And you're basically going to figure out like what their pulse is over the course of 60 seconds, right? Because that's what we're basing all of our heart rate averages on. So the average resting heart rates are about 70, but somewhere between like 70 and 80 beats per minute. It's usually about 70 for most men, about 75 for most women. But you can do this in a variety of different ways. You can count the pulse for the entire 60 seconds. If you want to, that ensures perfect accuracy. So if you're counting it for a full 60 seconds, great, go for it. I mean, that is a full 60 seconds that you are burning in your session. So we're not as huge a fan of that. Generally, you can do it for 30 seconds and multiply it by 2. You can do it for 15 seconds, multiply it by 4, which is my favorite version. 10 seconds multiplied by 6, which I don't know, you don't want to multiply by 6. And then you could do 6 seconds multiplied by 10, although on a resting heart rate, I don't really like 6 by 10, because if you miss like a half a beat in, you know, the beginning and in the end, it totally throws the whole thing off a little bit, you know. So the 6 by 10 is definitely the fastest version, and that's great mid workout. Like if you're doing a bunch of cardio and stuff, it's convenient because you can just do it really quickly. But I'm not as big a fan of that version for resting heart rates. For resting heart rates, we like to kind of go a little bit longer. So once we figured that out, right, once we figured out what their resting heart rate is, well, then we can kind of figure out a little bit about their target heart rate. And their target heart rate is, you know, specifically what their heart rate should be under various amounts of stress. So there's sort of two different ways that you can do this. There is the straight percentage formula, which is basically going to calculate your client's max heart rate, and then you're just going to work at a percentage of that heart rate max. So the target heart rate is a specific percentage of maximal heart rate that is used to guide exercise intensity. So in the same way that, like, maybe I want you to lift at 75% of your 1 rep max, or 80% of your 1 rep max, or something like that. That would be, you know, 75 pounds or 80 pounds or whatever, you know, if your heart rate max was 100. I'm sorry, if your 1 rep max was 100, I'd want you working at like a percentage of that, right? Like if I'm trying to go for endurance, I want you to lift between 50 to 70% of your, you know, 1 rep max in terms of like lifting. But for cardio, if I want endurance, I want you at about 65 up to about 75% of your maximum heart rate. If I want to go and build your anaerobic threshold, well, in that case, I want you to be between 76 and 85% of your heart rate max. And if I'm trying to improve your peak work capacity and metabolism, well, then I want to go all the way up to about 86, or maybe even as high as 95% of your heart rate max. And so, you know, these are very specific intensities that develop different physiologic adaptations. So in order to do that, we have to know what that stress looks like for your client. So there's the straight percentage formula, which means the first thing you need to do is calculate your client's max heart rate. And the way that you're going to do that is it is always going to be 220 minus your client's age equals heart rate max. Okay. It's always 220 and it's always your client's age. So for me, right, I'm 33. So it would be 220 minus 33. That gives me a max heart rate of about 187. If I was 20, it'd be 220 minus 20. My max heart rate would be 200. So I could just take that right now and calculate those numbers out, and then say like, all right, you know, I want to work at 65% of that, right? So 220 minus 33 times 65%. And it'd be like, all right, well, I want to be at a heart rate of about 122, or maybe I want to be between 65 and 75. So again, 27 times 0.75, you know, 140. So between 122 and 140, that's going to be my target heart rate, right? And that's fine. It's not bad. But here's the thing. It doesn't take into account like your client's individual athleticism. You know, I like to think that I'm a little bit better at cardio than most 33-year-olds. You know, I do a lot of running. So my max heart rate isn't really a good indicator of, you know, my overall athleticism, because it's just my age, and everyone my age is going to be the same. So because of that, we have a little bit of a different version here. And we're seeing what I just wrote out, actually, sorry. So for example, the goal is to be at 65 to 75% of your heart rate max. 220 minus 33, that's 187. 187 times 65, 187 times 75. That gives us, you know, that 121 to 140 range that we talked about. Well, 122 because we round up. That's the straight percentage formula, okay? And that's really good at first, but it's not very, like I said, it's not very specific to your client. So because that's not very specific to your client, we have a little bit of a different version here, which is called the heart rate reserve method. The big thing they used to ask back in the day they would say like it is considered the gold standard of heart rate client prescription. That's the phrase I had to memorize to pass my tests a billion years ago. So now it's a little bit different. They say it's the Carbonate Formula or the heart rate reserve formula. I don't know which version they're going to call it in your test. They kind of use them interchangeably. It's kind of all over the place. So just remember that it means both. And so what that is, what the Carbonate Formula is, it's going to calculate your target heart rate based on the difference between your max heart rate, which is just your age, and your resting heart rate, which is like how well your heart is performing, right? So, you know, this formula is a little bit different. We take a heart rate max and we subtract our heart rate rest from that number. So, you know, like I said, it'd be 220 minus 33, and then we would subtract further the resting heart rate. For me, let's see, right now, that is at 69 beats. Usually a little bit lower than that, but I'm doing a lot of talking. So we say minus 69, we hit enter, that gives me 118. Then I multiply it by the intensity. So my intensity, let's say, is 65%. Oh, shoot. What was it? 69 times 0.65%. That gives me 76.7. But I took that resting heart rate out of there, so I got to add that resting heart rate back on at the end, right? And so then I add that initial resting heart rate back on of 69 beats, and there we go. Now my new target heart rate is going to be 145.7. So this is a little bit more accurate because, like, if I have a resting heart rate to account for, you know, it's taking into account how well my heart is performing under various situations. It's a much more specific to your client version. It's still a formula. Like, don't get me wrong, like, this still isn't perfect, but it's definitely a lot more accurate than the straight percentage formula. So again, our client is 33 years old. We assume their resting heart rate is 75 beats per minute. So 220 minus 33, that's going to be 187. We take 187, we subtract 75 because that's their resting heart rate. That gives us 112. We multiply that by 65% or 75%. And then we tack on that resting heart rate again, right? So 72 plus we got to put the 75 back on there. That gives us 147. 84, we got to tack the 75 back on there. That gives us 159. So there we go. Our client's heart rate range, and there's the whole formula kind of laid out in one big string, is going to be now 148 to 159. So you can see instead of 122 to 140, we're seeing 148 to 159. This is going to be a much more accurate version. This wouldn't have even been a workout for our client initially, right? This would actually have been a little bit too gentle. The highest range, the 75%, was actually lower than the 65% here. So that's not difficult enough for your client to experience change. And a lot of clients fall for this because you'll see it on frickin' treadmills. If I just look up like a treadmill panel, let's see if panel not working. That's not what I want. Let's just see if I can find like an image of this on Google. Yeah, look at that. Perfect. Oh, that's hilarious. It's got a TV in it. So in a lot of treadmills, they'll do this. Yep, there it is. This is the classic like Life Fitness treadmill. You'll see it like LA Fitness a lot of times. Anybody in here who's an LA Fitness member should recognize this right away. Oh no, can I, here, open the image in a new tab. There we go, now I can zoom in. So take a look over here, you can actually see zone training, and it says, here's your fat burning zone, that's the yellow number, and here's your cardio zone, that's the sort of bluish number. And it's like based on your age, if you're 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, and it says, you know, if you're 30, it says heart rate of 123. Well, guess what? That is exactly the number we saw up here in our straight percentage formula, right? We saw 122. our person's 33 years old, so it's just a little bit. But like if they were 30 years old, it would be 220 minus 30 times 0.65. And there it is, right? So you're seeing like what their heart rates are depending on their age. Not very accurate, right? Like totally just assuming that everybody's the same. This could explain, this is a lot of times like what explains like why our clients go to the gym and they try to seek improvement and they're like, oh, well, I want to be in the fat burning zone. They're here, but they're just not burning very many calories. They're just not, you know, getting an actual workout in. And it's because it's just, oh, good Lord. It's just a sort of general take on things. We want to have a specific take on things, you know. Any questions on any of that, guys?
No, you're not in there.
Oh, what's that, Lorianne?
Nothing.
Oh, Lorianne, I think your mute button came undone. Oh boy. There we go. All right, let's take a look at blood pressure next. So blood pressure is another physiologic assessment. Physiologic assessments are pretty much all the ones that are based around your cardiorespiratory system. So blood pressure, obviously, pretty important freaking number. It determines like how well blood is actually able to kind of move around your body. And so it's divided up into sort of two halves. You've got your systolic blood pressure and your diastolic pressure. We talked about this the other day when we were talking about the cardiovascular system. So systolic pressure is the high number. That's the number that's on top. You know, typical blood pressure should be about 120 over 80. If your systolic pressure is the pressure that's pushing against the walls of your blood vessel when your heart contracts. So as your heart is contracting, obviously the pressure is going to be a little bit higher. That's why that's the top number. And then you've got your diastolic pressure, which is the pressure that as your heart relaxes, you know, blood's still pressing, but it's not pressing quite as hard. And so that's going to be the low number, and that's your diastolic pressure. So like I said, normal blood pressure should be about 120 over 80. If your client has blood pressure that's as high as like 140 over 90, and that is chronic, that is considered hypertension or high blood pressure. And that's where, you know, they need to speak to their doctor about like, you know, how they can lower their blood pressure. And then their doctor is going to say, well, you go work out at the gym, get more fiber in your diet and eat healthier, right? So basically, this is going to walk you through like blood pressure testing. You've got the blood pressure cuffs in your guys' bags. And what you do is you basically place the cuff on their left arm, a couple inches above the elbow. And then you take the blood pressure cuff and you inflate it. Meanwhile, you're going to be keeping an eye on the pressure there. And you're also going to wear a stethoscope, which will allow you to hear their pulse. You place the stethoscope underneath the cuff, so it kind of gets tucked between the arm. It gets tucked between the arm and the cuff there. And what will happen is, as you're inflating, you're going to see the pressure goes up in the cuff. So the pressure will increase slowly, and all of a sudden, as you're inflating, you'll start to hear their pulse will show up. You're going to keep inflating, and then their pulse will disappear again. So you won't be able to hear it at first. Then you'll inflate. You'll start hearing their pulse, and like bum, 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 right? And then you're gonna go, okay, and you're gonna keep inflating. You go about 20 to 30 millimeter, 20 to 30 units of pressure up above where you stopped hearing their pulse. Then you're gonna use the little outtake valve, and you're just going to release that, and their pressure is going to slowly start to release. Don't release it too quickly. You need to be able to kind of pay attention. And then what you're going to do is you're going to listen. And as soon as you start to hear their pulse again, you're going to write that number down. That's going to be their systolic blood pressure. You'll keep hearing their pulse, ba-bump, 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 ba-bump. Then all of a sudden, their pulse will disappear. The pressure that it was at when you stopped hearing their pulse, that's going to be their diastolic pressure. So like I said, should be about 120 over 80. I'll be honest, guys, chances are if you are doing blood pressure testing at your gym, you'll probably use one of the electric ones that do it automatically for you. They're not quite as accurate as the handheld ones, but they're also much more convenient. So chances are you'll end up using one of the electric ones. And the way you do that, strap it on the arm, hit start. That's it. But the big thing you guys need to know, honestly, and they're not going to ask you, they're not going to test you on, specific, like how many millimeters of mercury do you inflate the cuff above, where you stop hearing their heart rate. You're not going to do that. They'll just ask you like what normal blood pressure is. It should be around 120/80. They might ask you like what is considered hypertension. That is 140/90. Or they might say like which of the following is the definition for systolic blood pressure, or the pressure exerted on the walls during the heart's relaxation is considered the blank, and then you would know that that's diastolic pressure. So you might get questions like that. But yeah, that's how that works. But in the real world, you honestly probably won't even use like a real blood pressure cuff. So body composition stuff. So those are our physiologic assessments. So we're pivoting out of there and taking a look at body composition assessments. So there's a couple different versions of this, right? When it comes to body composition, a client's weight, their body fat percentage, their circumference measurements, all of those things are, going to tell us about like someone's composition, their BMI, all that. So there are a variety of methods out there for estimating body composition. So we have got your percentage of body fat. This is going to be a big one. This is going to calculate your client's body fat mass based on, how much fat is on their body versus like their overall body weight, right? So if I weighed 200 pounds and I had 25 pounds of fat on me, that would mean that I have a body fat percentage of about 12.5%, which is pretty good, So 25 pounds of fat is great. But if I weighed 200 pounds and I had, let's say, 50 pounds of fat on me, 50 divided by 200, that would mean that I would have a body fat percentage of about 25%, which is not so great, right? Like that kind of puts us into sort of the health risk range. So percentage of body fat's a pretty good way to estimate, a client's body composition, because it's something that's very easy to pay attention to and track. So percent body fat, by definition, we calculate an individual's mass versus their body fat versus their oh, I read that wrong. I was like, that sentence doesn't make any sense. Calculates an individual's mass of body fat versus their overall body mass, okay? So there's a couple different ways you can gather this information. There are skin fold measurements, which is the one that used to be most common. Nowadays, it's not used that often. But we gave you that little body fat caliper. You'll find that in your Sochi bags. Oops, videos. Oops. And it's this little pincher that kind of looks like this. It's this little like plastic pincher thing. And what you do, you see this little, you see this right here. There's a little plastic piece above, like where, it's got like the big sort of the rod that goes across like, 0, 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. And it's got the millimeters like 10, 20, 40, up to 70. And then do you see that little plastic bit that's above it with the lines that are looking down? That actually moves. So what you would do is you actually slide that. This is all the way over to the right here. You would slide this little plastic piece right here all the way over to this side. And then you're going to pinch your client on their, a specific part of their body. Actually, yeah, that's a good picture right there. So what you do, and you can see actually, you can see they moved that plastic piece. You want it moved all the way over to the left because you want it to be at 0% at first. And then what you do is you grab like grab your client's skin, and then you pinch the body fat tester. And what's going to happen is the more body fat that they have, you're going to have to pinch harder and harder and harder before this little knob right here, this little like circular knob, which is ever so slightly larger than the slot that it's going into. As you're pinching it, all of a sudden it will click. It'll kind of shoot through to the other side of the hole, and that's where you stop pinching. And once you've found that, you're going to release, and that little plastic knob will tell you how many millimeters it took while you were pinching. This is not how you do this. I don't know what this person's testing. They're literally just goofing around. This tells you nothing. That is not one of the sites. But this right here is an accurate one. Right here, side just above, on the pelvis. This version also doesn't work. You do not want to just pinch your client. You want to grab a fold with your hand, and then you are going to pinch that. So do not ever do this version where you just pinch somebody. That's totally going to be inaccurate. So NASM is going to recommend that you do what is called the Durnan-Wamersley version of body fat testing. This is how we're doing skin fold measurements if you end up doing it this way. Skin fold measurements are basically going to estimate your body fat percentage by measuring the girth of the fat that's underneath your skin. So you need to do this skin pinch, and then you need to like pinch that body fat. So the Durnan, there's a couple different versions out there. Let's see here. I'm trying to find sort of other versions that are out there. Yeah, here's the Jackson Pollock version where you do the thigh, the abs, and the pectorals. NASM isn't going to do that. Again, don't do this where you're just pinching. Make sure you grab it and then pinch. NASM is going to do the Durnan-Wamersley formula. So Durnan-Wamersley is a little bit different. This is a 4-site method instead of a 3-site method. And what you're going to do is you're basically going to pinch just above the pelvis on the iliac crest there. So that's a little bit just off to the side of the belly button, just above that little knob on the hip. You're also going to do the subscapular. So where their scapula comes together, you're going to go 1 to 2 centimeters below where their scapula is at. The bicep, you're going to go halfway between the shoulder and the elbow. And the tricep, you're going to go halfway between the shoulder and the elbow. So you measure those 4 sites. And then what you do is you total up all the numbers and you look on this little chart, and it'll be something like this. So let's say you were pinching your client and it came out to, we'll say 85 millimeters altogether, right? It was 15 on the biceps and 20 on the subscapular, added up to 85 altogether. Well, you would look to see what client your age is, or what age your client is. Let's say they're between 30 and 39, 85 folds. That means that they've got about 27% body fat. So that's definitely going to be really, really high. So that's the Durnan-Wamersley formula. It is pretty accurate. And here's all the 4 sites. Like I said, biceps, triceps, subscapular, and iliac. Add all the numbers up and then compare it to your client's age on that big chart. That chart is in your books as well, by the way. You don't always have to Google it. But here's the thing. The skin fold stuff, obviously human error. If you pinch too hard or don't stop when you're supposed to stop, that could cause like an error. Your client could have really loose skin the older we get. This isn't really recommended for performing on senior clients. It can also cause bruising, which is not super ideal. It's not recommended in clients who are extremely obese. If you have a very obese client, this is not a very good method because it loses accuracy. So the skin fold measurements aren't bad, but they're definitely not the most common version of what you're going to do. Generally, when you are measuring body composition, you'll probably end up using, I forgot. Oh my gosh, I forgot to show you the pictures are in the freaking PowerPoint. There's the bicep, right? I said vertical fold halfway between the shoulder and the elbow. There's the tricep, vertical fold halfway between the shoulder and the elbow. Subscapular, 45-degree angle fold, 1 to 2 centimeters below the inferior angle of the scapula. So trace their scapula until you see that. 1 to 2 centimeters below that, and you're going to go at sort of a 45-degree angle. And then the same thing is true here. 45-degree angle just above the iliac crest. So just above that little knob on the hip there. For the record, like if you do your skin fold testing accurately and you don't fall into any of those categories that I mentioned, it actually can be very, very, very accurate. But for the most part, we definitely want to use probably a little bit more of a convenient version. And so a little bit more of a convenient version is going to be something like bioelectric impedance. So bioelectric impedance is another way to test your body fat percentage. If anybody in here has one of those scales that has like the little electrodes on them, and as you like put your foot on there, it tells you your body fat percentage. Well, the way that that works is basically it's running an electric current through the body. You know, you can see here, the current's going to travel up and then it's going to go to here and it's going to travel down, right? That electric current's running from place to place. And so we know how fast electricity travels through water, right? Like when it comes to how fast an electric current should travel through water, scientists know exactly how fast that signal should be able to travel. So if you grab onto that and you tell the scale that you weigh, let's say 200 pounds, and that electric signal travels through you at the speed of water, mostly, right? Well, then it knows that that signal's traveling really quickly. That means that like most of the tissue on your body is made up of water, and most of your cells are made up of water. But there's a certain type of cell that is not made of very much water, and that is your fat cells, right? So your fat cells actually don't conduct electricity very well. So if that electric signal travels really, really slowly, that is how our body knows that you have a higher body fat percentage. So if two people were to grab, you know, this little bioelectric tester right here, right? If two people who both weighed the same grabbed it, and the electric current travels fast through one person and slow through the next person, that's going to indicate that person A had a low body fat percentage and person B had a high body fat percentage. So this person right here has about 19.5% body fat, which is pretty low. That's pretty good. Because I think that's a female hand, so that's exceptionally good. So that's how it's going to do. Electric currents run through water very quickly. It runs through lipids very slowly. There's also hydrostatic weighing. This is another pretty popular method. This is arguably the most accurate of all of the methods. We also know how much body fat weighs underwater. So if you had two people and they both weighed 200 pounds on land, and then you put them underwater and you weighed them again, and one person weighed, I don't know, we're gonna make up some numbers. Let's say 160 pounds underwater, and then the other person weighed 180 pounds underwater. Well, fat actually floats. It's buoyant. So because of that, if you weigh less when you're underwater, that indicates a higher body fat percentage. And if you weigh more while you're underwater, that indicates a lower body fat percentage. So a quick little bit of math can tell us exactly what your body fat percentage is. This is the most accurate of all of the formulas. In terms of how this works, this is the most accurate. Although I will say, guys, bioelectric impedance is getting really good in the last few years. Like they've gotten better at it, you know? And then there's other stuff out there. There's like, let's see here. What is it? What's that freaking body fat tester? Low X-ray. There is a, they have them in certain gyms. I feel like they have them at Crunches now. Sometimes. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I can't remember what it's got. I gotta look it up some other way. So there are those new machines out there where you can kind of stand, and it looks like, and honestly, it looks exactly like the you know, when you go to LAX, you got to put your hands above the thing, and it just like spins real quick. Sort of the new version of, metal detectors or whatever. It kind of looks like that actually. And basically it uses like really, really, really low grade X-rays. And it kind of just goes straight through all your clothing and stuff to sort of analyze your body fat that way. And those are pretty good too. Those are getting more popular, starting to see them in more gyms, but they're huge. So I don't know. I don't know how long they're going to last. I personally don't think they're that convenient. Anyway, the next thing we got to look at are your circumference. So that's some of our body composition. Now we have looked at our weight. We have looked at our body fat percentage. Well, now we've got to look at our circumference measurements. And so if we're talking about like our client's overall body girth, right? This is going to see, this is a great way to look for improvements in specific parts of the body. And so you are going to measure how wide certain parts of the body are. And so when you're doing this, make sure you are always taking those measurements on the same side of the body every time. That's really important. Consistency is key here. And our sites that we're going to do this in, we are going to look to see the neck, which you're going to go right along the Adam's apple. I know, ladies out there, you might be like, can't see my Adam's apple. Yeah, it's still in the same spot. It's just not quite in the same, it's just not quite as pronounced. So Adam's apple is our landmark for the neck. Your chest, there's two ways to do this. It's either going to be along the first apparent flattening of the chest, if it is a female client, so that's your upper chest. Or if it's a male client, if there's no flattening that's apparent, you can just go straight along the nipple line. Me personally, I pretty much always just go straight along that line anyways, because like it's very convenient and consistent. The thing is, they don't usually do that in like female clients, because a lot of your female clients will wear like a different type of clothing every time they do the assessment. And, depending on like what type of sports bra is being worn or like what type of outfits being worn, those numbers can fluctuate like crazy. Let me tell you from personal experience, it's always one of those things where like you're talking to your client and you're like, you lost 3 inches overall, but your chest went up 3 inches by itself. It's like, okay, well, that's clearly like a, just a different outfit. However, that problem can be solved instantly by just making sure your client wears the same outfit every time. So Nassim says, do it along the first flattening of the chest because that minimizes error. Me personally, I think like do it the exact same way with all of your clients, and just instruct all of your clients to wear the same clothing every time. I think that's much more convenient for them. And if you're taking before and after pictures, pretty easy to remember which outfit is which, Then you've got your waist measurement. So the waist measurement's very important. We need to do this very, very, very specifically. Where you are going to measure the waist is at the narrowest part of the waist below the rib cage, but above those hip bones, okay? So you look for the narrowest part of the waist. Now, if they are, and this is typically a male client thing, if there is no apparent narrowing, it's kind of just like a flat line here, then you can just go straight across the belly button. But because it's all going to be the same, doesn't matter where you measure it anyways. But you always want to do the narrowest part of the waist, because we're going to see this ratio here in just a second. We're going to look at your waist to hip ratio. So narrowest part of the waist. And then for the hips, you are going to go at the widest portion of the hips, with their feet together, widest portion. That you're going to look from the side to look at their glutes, and look to see like what the biggest measurement that you're going to get is. Usually it's on the along the apex of the glutes there. And so we definitely want to make sure these are the two most specific measurements that you're going to take. Your thigh, you're going to go 10 inches above the patella. I'll be honest, guys. Not all clients have 10 inches above their patella. They might be a little bit more of an efficient use of space. They may be built a little bit lower to the ground. So you can make that number up. You could say 6 inches above the patella. You can do whatever version you want to do, because you don't want to get all the way like up in their groin or whatever. And then calf, you're going to go at the widest portion of the calf. And that's true of the arms as well, which actually aren't on this list. If you decide to do the biceps, widest portion of the biceps. So widest portion of the calves, widest portion of the biceps. So that gives you a general idea of their body composition. So now we've got several pieces of data, which is really great because like if your client is on their weight loss journey and maybe they experience a plateau, you know, maybe like as you are working with them, you notice that like they plateau out. Well, if that happens, you know, and it's like their body fat percentage maybe stayed the same, or maybe their scale weight stayed the same for a week. But if you measure their circumference measurements and you notice that like those are changing, you know, that can kind of put your client's mind at ease. And it's like, look, I know the scale didn't move this week, but all of your inches went down. Clearly, you know, you are changing your body composition. So this is why we really like body composition testing. It's a really great way for us to have different data points and sort of put our client's mind at ease in case they need it. So your waist to hip ratio is the ratio of body girth when you are comparing the narrowest part of your waist to the widest part of your hips. So your waist to hip ratio is actually really important in terms of your health. And so we know there is a correlation between certain chronic diseases and particularly abdominal fat. Like we know that obesity is obviously bad for us, right? But there is something especially bad about abdominal obesity. And so we know that there's actually a greater amount of risk for heart disease, diabetes, and things like that. Because basically when your body fat is all trapped on your abdomen, it starts to have these really weird metabolic properties, kind of starts acting like its own organ and, you know, taken over and sort of screwed up your metabolism and stuff. So that's why that is particularly dangerous. So when we do that narrowest part of your waist divided by the widest part of your hips measurement, this gives us our waist to hip ratio. And ideally, those ranges should be anywhere below 0.8 for our female clients or anywhere below 0.95 for our male clients. So if you are measuring your waist to hip ratio and you're taking a look at that, this can indicate where, you know, your abdominal obesity is, right? Like we can see the difference here, right? This is particularly like, you know, this is like a wide measurement here, but this is a wide measurement up top. This would be considered more dangerous than this. So that is sort of what we are looking at there. And so like those ratios, that's just a good indicator. Like if your client is very serious about tracking their health statistics, I love paying attention to the waist to hip ratio. It's just a really great way to kind of keep an eye on that. And then there is body mass index as well. I love that they put this at the end of the list, even though this is usually what is sort of the fastest to calculate out in the beginning. But it gets less importance because it's put at the end, which I like. Your body mass index, not a huge fan of this number because a lot of people have sort of adopted it as a way of like measuring their health. Like, don't get me wrong, like excessive BMIs have been, absolutely have been linked to, increased risk of chronic diseases. But that information's sort of been misconstrued because like, when we say like people with excessive BMI are at greater risk for certain diseases, we mean that they are, if their body fat levels are high, they are at risk for certain diseases, right? Like it's not the fact that your actual body mass. And I always like to say this, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, like when he won, the frickin' contest for the most in shape person in the universe. When he won that, he literally was considered morbidly obese. His BMI was about 31, I think. So this is just a calculation of your weight versus your height. It's not a very, I don't put too much stock in this, but if your BMI, and this is the formula you guys need to have memorized, it is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. If it exceeds 25, that's considered overweight. If it exceeds 30, that is considered obese. So ideally, we want our BMI to be anywhere from 18.5 to 24.5. 0.9. That is going to be considered normal weight. But for those of you out there, you know, this is a school for personal trainers where a lot of people in this call have a lot of muscle. Your BMIs are probably a little bit higher. Muscle weighs a lot. It weighs, I think, 4 times, or maybe like 3. I think it weighs 3.5 times as much as fat does. So, you know, it's a big difference there. So if you have a high BMI, but your waist to hip ratio is great, if your body fat percentage is great, your circumference measurements look awesome, you've got nothing to worry about. And that's why I just don't care for that. I don't like the BMI. So that's all the body composition stuff. We got any questions on those guys? Any comments? Any of that confusing on how to do any of it?
All good.
Cool, cool. All right, let's take a look at our cardio assessment. So we didn't get a chance to do this yesterday. We are going to be looking at our cardio assessments when we get together next week. Let's see here. This is day 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 on next Thursday. So we're going to be meeting on Thursday next week. And that is where we'll sort of practice these cardiorespiratory assessments. They take a little bit of time. That's why we weren't able to get to them, but these are great because they tell you about your cardiorespiratory function. You know, they're going to tell us about the overall efficiency and function of your cardiorespiratory system. And so what's great about this is it provides us with a starting point for, you know, where to determine where you should start exercising. So what's great about these 2 assessments, guys, not only will it tell you, like, you can look for improvements over time, but it also tells us our starting point. Like, remember earlier, we calculated out, if we go to the top, you know, we calculated out their zone 1, which was 65 to 75%, but we also calculated out their zone 2 and their zone 3. But I wouldn't give someone who's, you know, has a weak heart zone 3 cardio. That might be too intense. So how do I know? How do I know which cardio routine to give my client to make sure that I'm not going too easy on them, but also not going too hard on them? Well, that is where we have our cardiorespiratory assessments. So the first one we're going to look at is the YMCA 3-minute step test. So I'm going to show you a little video of this here. And, ooh, you know what? I have not seen this video. I'm kind of curious how this video is. We're gonna be a little experimental today because I'm always looking for better versions of things. This is a new one. If this person does the entire test, I'm gonna skip past it. But here's my share sound button. Okay.
In this video, I'm going to show you how you can perform a YMCA 3-minute step test.
All right, I'm already weirded out. What is with this guy's studio? All right, whatever.
At home on your own. Now, this test is used to evaluate your cardiovascular fitness, which is incredibly important that your heart and vascular system are working efficiently and working well, as they are major predictors for long-term chronic disease or long-term chronic health. Kind of a weird way to put it, but regardless, many people have used this test, and you can calculate, I'll link to a link below that you can also use it to estimate your VO2 max, which many healthcare providers consider to be an additional vital sign. Your cardiovascular endurance is so important. So here's how you do the YMCA 3-minute step test. First, you'll need to be able to take your heart rate. So if you don't know how to take your heart rate, I'd like you to go ahead and just YouTube that and find a video that you feel good about taking your heart rate. You can do it yourself if you don't have a...
I hate to do it. I'm not into this. We're gonna watch one of my old staples. we're gonna watch a better version of this. Ironically, my favorite version are actually these 2 students right here who are literally, like, I think they made this video like for like an in-school project.
Welcome to the YMCA
But honestly, like they give the best explanation. Like these kids crush it.
3-minute step test featuring North Park's very own exercise science major, Nikki and Kaylee. We'd like to introduce you to the fantastic world of fitness testing and show you that it is possible for you to do it too.
Okay.
This is what you're gonna need: a 12-inch step, a stopwatch, a metronome, a chair to measure heart rate, and don't forget water to stay hydrated. Before we start, the tester needs to measure the subject's resting heart rates. I took Kaylee's heart rate for 1 minute.
You've actually already done that.
She
right?
has a resting heart rate of 60 beats per minute. Once the subject's heart rate is measured, it is important to demonstrate how to perform the test. The tester needs to start the metronome at 96 beats per minute, which equals 24 steps per minute. The subject first steps up with 1 foot on beat 1 and steps with the second foot on beat 2, then steps down with the first foot on beat 3 and down with the second foot on beat 4. Allow the subject to demonstrate. Once the subject confirms they're ready, as Kaylee gave a thumbs up, the test can begin. Now the real thing. Good luck, Kaylee.
So she's going to go for 3 minutes here. I'm going to skip past that. And she's going to, keep on pace with that metronome. And then once she gets to the end of it, they're going to stop the timer, stop the metronome. And
Subject should immediately sit down so the tester can take a post-exercise heart rate.
And then you're going to measure their heart rate as they are sitting. And you're going to look to see what their recovery pulse is. And then you're going to look on this little chart right here. And it's going to tell you, like, based on what their age is, how well they performed, right? So if, that girl's definitely between 18 and 25. So like, let's say her heart rate was like 89 beats per minute, right? That would put her in the good category right here between 85 and 93. So the things you guys need to know, because they will ask you any version of this on a multiple choice question. First, what is the YMCA step test? Well, it is a test that determines a client's cardiorespiratory training zones based on a bout of sub-maximal stair climbing. So you're basically putting them like up and down these stairs, right? So you go for 3 minutes, doing 24 steps per minute. And when I say 24 steps per minute, I mean a step is like up, up, down, down. That's one step, not, step. Really, that would be 96 touches overall. And you do it on a 12-inch step and you go for 3 minutes, right? So 12 inches on the step and they go for 3 minutes, up, up, down, down. And you are going to play a metronome at 96 beats per minute. So that's the pace you go at. So what that metronome does is that ensures that your client does exactly 24 steps per minute. If they go faster, they would be putting too much stress on the cardiovascular system. If they went slower, they'd be doing, not enough stress. So we want to put the same amount of stress on our client every time. That's why the step needs to always be 12 inches. That's why they need to always go with the metronome. And then what you're going to have them do is you're going to have them turn around and sit once the test is over. And as quickly as you can, you are going to record their recovery pulse. Now, if you were mid-cardio workout, you'd want to know what their pulse is, in the moment at any given time. That is not how the step test works. The step test, you want to gather their recovery pulse. We want to measure how quickly their pulse returns to normal after we put this specific amount of stress on them. So you cannot just measure it for 30 seconds and multiply by 2. You can't do 15 seconds multiplied by 4. Can't do any of that. You need to measure it for a full 60 seconds because it's not about what their pulse is at the end of the test. It's about what their pulse is after 1 minute at the end of the test. So their heart rate's going to be like this. It's going to be really fast, and then it's going to kind of slow down and get back to a normal rhythm. If it slows down really quickly, great, they're in awesome shape. If not, that's what we're looking at. So you're going to locate the score. You're going to locate the score on like these little charts. And you're going to look to see, these charts are in, like I said, they're in chapter 6 of your book. You know, if your client was female and they were 45 years old and their heart rate was, you know, 92 beats per minute, that'd put them in the good category right here. If your client was male, 27 years old, you'd be in here. And if their heart rate was 112 beats per minute, well, they'd be either below, they'd be right between below average and poor. So that's how we use that chart. Now, then what you're going to do, I'm not sure I'm actually going to find this. Oh wait, no, it's in the PowerPoint. I forgot. This is the big PowerPoint. So then what you're going to do is you're going to look at what your client's score is, right? If they did poor, you're going to only give them a zone 1 workout. You do not want to take them above 75% of their heart rate max when you're exercising. If their score was fair, same thing. Don't take them above 75%. If they did average or good, you can take them all the way up to 85%. And if they did very good or excellent, you can take them all the way up to 95% of their heart rate max. So this is going to keep your clients safe. This is going to, by performing this assessment, give you specific target ranges, right? So we want to get our client, you know, we want to build them a foundation in zone 1, amp it up into zone 2, and then eventually we can start peaking in zone 3. So that's a really good assessment. Now, another one that's also really good, because here's the thing, the step test, it's not always the best test to do because it can be kind of high impact, right? Like 12 inches up and down, your client's trying to keep up with this like specific pace. It might be a little bit hard on the knees. So if you've got a client with arthritis, or, you know, maybe they struggle with their balance and something like this just isn't appropriate for them, well, then what you can do is what's called the Rockport walk test. And the Rockport walk test is a really great assessment where your client is basically going to walk 1 mile sub-maximally. They're not like sprinting, you know, they're not running that mile. They're going to walk it as fast as they can, and you're going to record how long it takes them to complete the walk. And then this version is not a recovery pulse. We want to know what their heart rate is the second that 1 mile is over with. So this is where we want them, you know, we want to know specifically what their heart rate is actually at the end of the test. I encourage you to have your client wear an actual chest strap heart rate monitor while they do this, and that will give you a much more accurate reading. And you're just going to look to see exactly what it is in that moment. So here's a little video on how to do the Rockport walk test.
My name is Holly Del Rosso. I'm at the Works Personal Training Studio in New York City, and this is Rockport Fitness Test Tips. The Rockport Fitness Test is a great test for beginning athletes. If you've never worked out in your life, or you're a beginner at cardiorespiratory training, this is for you. This is gonna show you your VO2 max, which is how cardiovascularly fit you are. All you need is a stopwatch, a pen and paper, and you need to find out what your target heart rate is, and you can go on a track or you can hop on a treadmill. Come with me and let's get started. Make sure you guys know your target heart rate in order to perform the Rockport fitness test. Your target heart rate is going to tell you what your VO2 max is, which is what we're measuring in this test. Get your stopwatch ready. You could be on the track or on a treadmill. If you're on a treadmill, get to a pace where you feel like it's pretty challenging. 3.0 or 3.5 should be great for most individuals. Once you hit the mile mark, you're gonna look at how long it took you to get there, and you're gonna take your heart rate. You're gonna check your heart rate on your carotid artery. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, this is the best way to do it. Count to 6 and count how many beats in that 6 seconds, and add a 0 to that number. Once you have your number, you're gonna plug it into an equation which can be found online and look at a VO2 max chart, which is where you can see how cardiovascularly fit you are.
So she made a really good point. You want to do the pulse for about 6 seconds and multiply by 10, because we don't want the heart rate to slow down once the exercise is over, right? We're not counting for a full 60 seconds here. That would mean their heart rate would slow down as they're not exercising anymore. We want to know what their heart rate is the second that test is over. So this is used to actually estimate your VO2 max. So like she said, there's a formula online. By the way, the formula is stupid complicated. Actually, that's not what I want. Rockport walk test formula. Look at this formula. This is insane. So it is literally 132.853 minus 0.0769 times their weight in kilograms times 0.3877 times their age. It's a lot. So instead, we use a Rockport rock test calculator, and then we just punch in our statistics, right? So our client was male, we'll say 33 years old, 179 pounds. We'll give him a heart rate of, I don't know, let's say 110. And then it took them, let's say 15 minutes and 12 seconds. So that's going to give them a pretty good score, right? Their VO2 max is around 45.76. That's pretty good. They're capable of consuming a lot of oxygen. That means that they have lots of hemoglobin, lots of mitochondria inside their body, right? They scored pretty darn well. But let's say their heart rate was even lower. Let's say it was like 99 beats per minute, right? Well, now their VO2 max went up to like 47. Their score was 79. That's pretty darn good. Let's see, if I made it 98, I think that'd pop us up to 80. Yep, score of 80. That's still only good, huh? What about 14 minutes? There we go. So that gives us an excellent rating. This is like a world-class athlete, right? VO2 max of 50. They're able to consume lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of oxygen. So again, you're going to take a look at your client's score. And then when you look at that, if they scored poorly, you're only going to give them a zone 1 workout. If they scored fair, you're going to give them a zone 1 workout. Average, zone 2, good, zone 2. Or if they're very good or excellent, you're going to pop them into zone 3. So again, that's 65 to 75%, 76 to 85%, or 86 to 95. So that is our cardio stuff. And we're going to get a chance to practice that next week on Thursday. And that's actually about it, guys. A little bit quicker today. How's everybody feeling? You guys got any questions for me?
I'm cool.
Feeling good?
Yes.
Awesome. Andres, Isaiah, Jerica, you guys feeling good?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'll take it. All right, well then I'm kicking you out of here. All right, we'll wrap it up, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. No homework today, but if you haven't gotten your midterm done yet, please knock that out for me, and I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you. Good night. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Guys.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.